Hi everyone, I'm Heather Wen, a retired nurse practitioner and the founder and practitioner at Arizona Healing Alternatives. On this channel, you'll find several videos, what I like to call aha moments, where we'll be discussing issues that impact your health. So whether you decide to use Western medicine, alternative medicine, or even a mix of both, I'm passionate about you knowing what your options are. For today's aha moment, we're going to be talking about inflammation. We hear a lot about that word these days, but is inflammation a bad thing? Is it a good thing? What is it really about? And what's fascinating is that we didn't really always look at inflammation, but now we are. So let's find out why. Stay tuned. So what's interesting about inflammation is that when I went through nursing school in the 1990s, we really didn't discuss a lot about it unless you were talking about an injury. Inflammation, when we were talking about it back then, and it's still the same definition today, is defined as when something happens in the body and the body all of a sudden goes into reacting by creating, whether it's immune cells or non-immune cells, to rush in, and then there can be swelling and other things. But is that a bad thing? If you have an injury, you want inflammation because it's there to bring healing to that area. A really good example of that, if we look at the definition of inflammation, a really good example of that is oftentimes an inflammatory response is, well, let's explain even acupuncture. Because acupuncture, you're putting in a needle, which by definition what it's doing is it's creating a localized, meaning in the same area, it's creating a localized inflammatory or inflammation response in order to get the body to get those immune cells geared up, going in and healing that area. So really when we talk about inflammation these days, we're looking at chronic inflammation. So an acute inflammation, meaning, it happens right there at the time when something happens, like an injury, like you're doing a treatment, something like that, then that is normal and something that the body is okay with. But what happens when it's on a chronic basis? So what can cause chronic inflammatory conditions? Those white blood cells that are there to help clean up bacteria, viruses, all sorts of different toxins and things, they get overstimulated, and then eventually what can happen is those white blood cells that are supposed to be the good guys end up attacking the cells of the body. So almost an autoimmune sort of situation where they go into overdrive and they're overtaxed. And when they get overtaxed, it can lead into those autoimmune things such as Crohn's disease. It can even, these days they're even talking about correlations with that and cancer, inflammation in cancer, and also in Alzheimer's, in all sorts of different diseases where inflammation is now where we're narrowing down, seems to be the key and seems to be the common denominator in a lot of these different conditions. And inflammation can also be, it can run in families. It can be genetically linked as well. Although what's interesting is oftentimes like less than 10%, I know of cancers anyway, are genetically linked, which is unusual. You would think that it would be a lot higher. But there can be genetic tendencies for things like inflammation. And there can also be learned family traits of stress, and how do you deal with stress? And do you deal with stress in a way that is healthy for a body, or do you deal with stress in a way that is unhealthy? Like also things that can play a role in inflammation are environmental toxins, from the air we breathe to the exact food we eat. That can also be something. So what about things where we know that if there are fat cells or excess fat cells, there are immune cells within those fat cells. And sometimes what happens is that can create a localized inflammatory response that you don't even notice. But what it's doing over time is it's overacting that immune system, and then it can lead, in some people, not everybody, but in some people it can lead to other chronic conditions like cardiovascular conditions. We're starting to link more and more diseases and more issues to inflammation. Okay, so what do we know about that? We know that in inflammatory conditions that, like I said, cardiovascular disease or heart attacks, there can be even arthritic things, all sorts of things like osteoarthritis, a bunch of different conditions that inflammation is a part of it. So over the long haul, inflammation is not a great thing. So what in the world do we do about it, or what can you do about it? Well, before we get to what you can do about it, what I find really interesting is I find about stress. Well, what about stress in general? Well, so what? If I have a stressful day, why is that an issue? Well, it's okay if you have a stressful day. People have stressful days. But what happens is, over time, that stress actually creates that sort of fight or flight and inflammatory response in some people's bodies. And what I find even more interesting is that then the body behaviorally, we know this, and I'm going to put some links to a couple of articles in the description section that are going to talk about, in those cases, the body will actually protect itself psychologically. All right, what does that mean? Well, if you've ever seen a hurt or wounded animal, what do they tend to do? They tend to hide, right? Well, human beings do the same thing. If there's chronic inflammation, there can be sort of isolation or stresses or depression. Of course it hurts, right? So that over time can lead to depression, but they found even can lead to humans wanting to disconnect from other people and not wanting to be around. Well, because there's many reasons for that. I mean, if you think about it, if you have, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis, or you have something that is chronic, it may make you not feel really well, so you don't want to go out. But at the same time, there's other survival mechanisms that make people want to isolate themselves under those conditions. So what do we do, and what can you do to get some help? Well, first of all, it's finding out about inflammation in general, because nutritional factors can also play a factor when we talk about whether it's fat cells, but let's say it's not fat cells. Some people believe that there's certain types of foods that can lead somebody's specific body to have an inflammatory response. I find that interesting because a long time ago, when I was put on the sugar control diet, because sugar can be very inflammatory in a lot of people's bodies, in most people's bodies. But way back when, in the 1990s, when I was learning and I was a patient of a TBM practitioner, Total Body Modification, which is the applied kinesiology I do now, what I find fascinating was, I remember now everyone's low carb and all that stuff, not back then. So what happened back then was I went on the sugar control diet to kind of control, I didn't know I was controlling inflammation, but basically went on that diet to kind of get, myself healthier at that time, and my practitioner put me on it. Well, I just remember people laughing at me because I didn't have the bread on my tuna sandwich. I just had my tuna sandwich. I guess it's not a sandwich, it's just tuna. And so I had that for lunch, and people were making fun of me right and left. Well, and this is the nurses, at the nursing station. Well, fast forward, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden the big low carb craze and the sugar and all this sugar and inflammation, all this stuff starts coming out. And now we're at a very different level with that, of learning different ways to control inflammation. So there are different blood tests that can be done to check that out. Like I said, a C-reactive protein, there's all sorts of different things, for infections and stuff, because remember, inflammation is designed to help the immune system fight off bacteria, fight off viruses, fight off everything else. So there's different blood tests. So you can always check with your Western medical practitioner to do that. Also then, what do you do once you find an inflammation? Well, obviously there's going to be nutritional things. There's some people who believe in alkaline diets. There's all sorts of different diets, and I don't even go into those, that can help with inflammation. But so seek out, whether it's a nutritionist, whether it's a naturopath. Naturopaths have wonderful ways of dealing with different supplements that can help calm inflammation. And then you can look at other things like your lifestyle and your stress, especially your stress, because we know in the long run, people who are under a great deal of stress all the time, these are the people that can end up with heart attacks, that can end up with a cardiovascular disease, that can end up with all sorts of different things. So it's about looking at all the aspects of it, and then looking at the social aspects of it as to maybe it's getting counseling, maybe it's something, especially if you're feeling more isolated because you can't move as well as you could before. And what I do, we look at the body as a whole and start working on what are the factors that are setting off this body's immune system, whether it's allergies, whether it's structural, whatever it is, whether it's emotional, doing some emotional reprogramming to get in, and all with the goal of calming down that inflammation so that you can be healthier in the long run. I hope this information has been helpful to you. Once again, you can hit that subscribe button. I encourage you to do that if you want to see videos of like this come out, and hitting that notification bell can do that too. Please, if you'd like to, hit the thumbs up if you like this video, put comments, anything that you'd like, and I'll be happy to respond to those. So have a great day, and recognize a little bit of inflammation, that's protection for the body. A lot in chronic inflammation, needing to get some help. Have a good one.